probably already know that colostrum is the first step in starting calves off right. But what are the other factors that come into play? Welcome to Beyond Colostrum, the show where we'll talk about how to optimize your calves with science and research that goes beyond just colostrum. We'll challenge the ways you typically manage your calves, and you might learn some new concepts beyond what you're already used to. Thanks for joining us as we go beyond colostrum.
Thank you to everyone that's listening. Thank you again for joining us for another episode of Beyond Colostrum. I am today's host, Juliana Langemeyer, and I have joining me Dr. Travis White and Dr. Mike Nagorski, two well-equipped, well-educated veterinarians on my team who offer really good insight on some topics that we're bringing to you guys. So today we're going to talk about something that's pretty relevant in today's industry. Here in June, antibiotics will be switching to prescription only. So it really will affect the cattle industry, but we want to talk a little bit more about how this will maybe affect calves and what we can do ultimately to maybe prevent the need for so much intervention or prevent the need for antibiotics in certain situations. So we first want to start with just a little bit of an introduction on what are antibiotics, what are they used for? So Mike, if you want to give a little bit of intro on that, and then also what do you see antibiotics being used for in calves?
So antibiotics, I think there's a lot of different diseases when we think about calves, whether we're thinking about a dairy calf or a beef calf or, really any scenario. Many times we don't, like on the human side, sometimes we can get a specific diagnosis of a calf, right? And we know there's viral causes, there's parasitic causes of illness, and bacterial causes. And the thing with antibiotics, I think that, as we think about treating calves, we really are treating the bacterial causes, and whether that's actually happening or not in a calf. An antibiotic is designed to specifically have an effect to kill or decrease the growth of bacterial pathogens and that. And so that's what antibiotics are designed to do, is actually specifically have an impact, whether it's the growth of the bacteria or actually destroy bacteria. That's what antibiotics are designed to do.
Do you see that as what they're commonly used for? When you go to use an antibiotic on a calf, what's typically the approach, or what do you look for? Travis, do you want to elaborate on that a little bit? What's the use that you see in antibiotics for calves?
Yeah, so Mike kind of alluded to that. That when we talk about antibiotics, they're really specific for bacteria, and then antibiotics kind of fall into two camps, right? So we have broad spectrum antibiotics that they don't target one bacterial species, they just kind of target a multitude of bacteria. And so those are things, again, as you talked about, Juliana, things that have typically been available over the counter. So things like tetracycline, neomycin, spectinomycin, those are very broad spectrum antibiotics. And then we have antibiotics that are more focused. So those are the more powerful antibiotics. They really focus on, say, respiratory pathogens or things like that. So they kind of fall into those two camps. But you asked, how are they being used in the calf realm? And typically it's just, we've got a sick calf, it needs antibiotics, right? And so we're just applying these antibiotics, not necessarily without the information that we really need. Is this bacteria that we think the calf has, is it susceptible to the antibiotic, and vice versa? Is this calf really suffering from a bacteria, or is something else going on? And so oftentimes we don't have that information. And as producers and veterinarians, I'm guilty of it as well. We see an animal that's suffering from X, Y, or Z. It's got diarrhea, it's got pneumonia, it's got something else. We've been kind of accustomed to reaching for an antibiotic as the treatment. But we're finding more and more that really probably isn't necessarily the case, that the animal probably doesn't need an antibiotic, and that antibiotic probably isn't targeting the pathogen that the animal is suffering from. And then thirdly, those antibiotics aren't innocuous, right? So there's some inherent challenges that come with those. So, they're because they're not specific, we may be killing off some good gut bacteria. We know that the immune system has to process those antibiotics and things, so that there's an energy cost that comes to it. We know that if we treat an animal with antibiotics, we give up some production later in life because we've kind of messed up the metabolic system of that animal. So I think I see especially in the calf realm, probably the overuse of antibiotics. And most of the time, these animals really just need supportive care and monitoring. And most of the time, they would recover without the use of antibiotics.
Definitely. I think that's probably going to be one of the major shifts that we see, because it will be a little bit more challenging for producers to use antibiotics now that there's that extra step in working with your veterinarian. And hopefully, Mike, maybe you could talk about this a little bit. This might be a step in the right direction to working further with the veterinarian so that they can recognize what those symptoms maybe are meaning with that calf's disease challenge or health challenge, and then offer some better insight on how they should then treat that calf. So Mike, can you talk a little bit about how you think this will maybe affect the industry and affect how we intervene with our calves?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a good step in the right direction. We commonly, as veterinarians, are striving for judicious use of antimicrobials or antibiotics, right? And so what this does is it helps you maintain even maybe a better relationship with your veterinarian. It doesn't mean that you can't use antibiotics. It's just simply the step in the right direction to be more judicious in that. And I think Travis can allude to this as well. When you used to be able to go into, for example, a Fleet and Farm store and purchase an antibiotic, many times you go into those stores and there are, as Travis alluded to, different types of antibiotics used for different things and different classes of antibiotics. And those used to be just smattered throughout a store where you could go and just pick that up. And, as a veterinarian, I know both Travis and I received lots of training on the correct use of utilizing the correct drug, antimicrobial for a specific disease process and that. And so what this does is it just helps you better utilize the veterinarian oversight on that, so that we are applying the correct antimicrobials to the right disease types in that. And again, it doesn't mean we're going to not have that, but in some ways, it was very haphazard in how, for example, you could just go into a Fleet Farm store and pick whatever antimicrobial you want, because at the end of the day, the more we put out the use of an antimicrobial in a population of animals, there is no doubt resistance patterns that can be developed. And as stewards of these animals and as stewards of both animal health and human health, we have to keep that and be cognizant of what resistance patterns can develop with some of the overuse of antimicrobials. So yeah, it's going to be a positive effect, I think, in our industry. And I know there's going to be some people disappointed by it, but it really is going to help us to develop better relationships with our vets, and in the end, develop right protocols for the consumers too, that are going to be consuming the meat, the milk, whatever we're trying to develop.
I definitely agree with you. And I think from the producer standpoint, right, we're obviously trying to, as a cattle producer and coming from a family that raises cattle, it's painful to have to constantly treat calves, right? It's not something that you want to do. There's a labor associated, there's obviously cost associated with that. And so I think it's an exciting opportunity to help educate. What can we do then to help prevent calf illness, right? Not all of it is outside of our reach. And like you said, Mike, there's a time and a place for antibiotic use. But I think it's exciting for us to help educate. What can we do then to prevent some of this illness?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge that we're going to see moving forward is, who does this affect the most, right? So if you're a 10 or 15,000 cow dairy that has a great relationship with your veterinarian, at the end of the day, that veterinarian is putting together protocols for you, and it's not going to have probably a major impact on the large producers, but the small producer that struggles to build a relationship with their veterinarian, or they don't have enough animals to routinely have a veterinarian out, or I think that's the ones that it's going to affect the most. And so, just like Mike said, this gives you an opportunity to work with your veterinarian, to work with your local extension agents, whatever you can do to get protocols in place so that you can identify what's going on and having the ability to treat those animals. And just like Mike said, as a veterinarian, we've had extensive training on what antibiotics work, what dosages work, things like that. And I think that's where a lot of this regulation is coming from, right? So you think about penicillin, for example. If you were to go to your local farm store and buy a bottle of penicillin and go home and treat an animal at the labeled dose of that penicillin, it's really ineffective. That doesn't work at all. And so we have to use much higher doses than what is on the label. That requires recommendation from a veterinarian. And so some of those things, these antibiotics have been used at low doses that promote antibiotic resistance. And so there's reasons behind it. It's not like the government just wants to find another thing to regulate. It's really trying to reduce the amount of antibiotic resistance we're seeing, because a lot of these pathogens do have human health concerns, even on your own operation. So take a salmonella, for example, so we're seeing salmonella species out there that are pan resistant to every antibiotic out there. And then if you have a worker on your farm that gets exposed to salmonella and they become violently ill, then how does the health professional treat them when the salmonella is resistant to all the antibiotics we have? And so it actually is an insurance policy to the producer too, because if we're reducing these resistance mechanisms, now we have more opportunity to treat people that come into contact with the different pathogens, and it just provides better life-saving measures on the human side of things. So there is like I said, there's a lot of thought that's gone into this. It isn't just a conspiracy theory that the government is trying to find another thing to regulate. And it's really something that needs to happen in the industry. Again, you and we couldn't go to our local pharmacy and buy a bottle of penicillin or tetracycline or anything over the counter, because there has to be that oversight.
Definitely. And to your point, there are a lot of producers that are already doing that. I think this is just kind of we've been preparing them that this shift is going to happen. So now it's kind of a nudge in the right direction to get them to work more closely with their vets, and to take some of that pressure and responsibility off of the producer in having to be so aware of all of these things that really a veterinarian is trained to be able to be the resource to provide that guidance to the producer to ultimately help the overall health of your herd. So we are going to get a little bit into then what is the best way then to prevent antibiotic use. Talking about all the situations where we need to use antibiotics, but is there a way to prevent capsid illness? Is there a way to prevent maybe all of this need for antibiotic use? Travis, what's your best recommendation in how to prevent?
Well, I think first of all, we have to look at, so let's take calf scours as an example, right? So if a calf develops scours, and let's say we do a fecal sample and it comes back with rotavirus in the fecal sample. Did rotavirus cause the diarrhea, or did coronavirus cause the diarrhea? Oftentimes we look at these pathogens as being the causal effect of the diarrhea, but it's really a cascade of events. And so most of these pathogens, or quote unquote pathogens, are normal commensal flora that we can find in normal healthy calves. And so there's been a break in the system somewhere. Either there's been stress or a dietary change. something has happened that has made that animal more vulnerable to this pathogen kind of overgrowing and taking hold. And so, and it's the same with like BRD. You know, if you talk about bovine respiratory disease, they always describe it as a cascade of events. And so if we look at that bovine respiratory disease, you know, it starts with stress. Stress lowers the immune system. A virus comes in. That virus further erodes the immune function of that animal, and then at the very tail end, we end up with a bacterial pneumonia. Well, that very tail end is the only thing that can be treated with antibiotics. You know, the stress can't be treated with antibiotics. The virus can't be treated with antibiotics. It's only that the very end of the chain. So what do we do ahead of the chain to mitigate those things? So of course, we're talking about calves today. So how do we prevent scours? How do we prevent pneumonia in our animals? And we really have to look at every link in that chain. So the first thing always starts with good quality colostrum. So did I get an adequate amount of colostrum into that calf in a timely fashion so that they have the antibodies they need should they be exposed to a pathogen? How do I decrease stress? You know, so do I have things that mitigate heat stress and cold stress? Am I commingling calves at an inappropriate time? Am I making feed changes at intervals where there may be more stress in these animals? So trying to find those areas where we can lower stress, we can improve colostrum management, we can improve hygiene. Hygiene's the other thing. So especially with these new regulations, we're really going to have to get more cognizant about hygiene as well. And so improving our cleaning mechanisms and things that we do. But it's really trying to identify what's up the stream that's causing these animals to then be susceptible to the pathogen. Because again, again, rotavirus, for example, rotavirus is everywhere. So these calves are exposed to it every day, routinely. It can be found as a normal organism within the animal, but they don't break with diarrhea on a daily basis. There's something else that has caused this animal to be more susceptible. So whether it's, again, stress, gut health, low colostrum quality, all of those things have to be looked at and managed so that we can make that animal as productive as it can be.
You guys have worked with a lot of producers, so I'm sure that you have maybe a scenario or a situation in mind where you've helped that producer identify maybe some of those stressors or an opportunity to improve their colostrum quality. Can you guys think, either of you, I'm not going to call on one of you, but either of you, can you think of a situation where you kind of stepped in and helped that producer identify one of those opportunities for improvement? And ultimately, what was the producer's reaction? Like, how did that play out?
Oh yeah, I mean, there's scenarios every day. You know, oftentimes I think about what's the most grandiose thing that happened, right? So I had a producer one time that built a new calf ranch or calf raising facility, I should say. And they had been operating for a few months. Initially, things were going pretty good. And then when they called me, things were a complete disaster. Calves were dying. They all had diarrhea. And so as I went and started looking into what was going on, you know, one of the things they had done, and it was a labor saving thing to them. So they had ran this black poly pipe with like hog nipple water on them so the calves could drink it. It was like on demand water. And conceptually it sounded great, but then, you know, now it's August, the heat's beating down on those stainless steel hog nipples. And so those baby calves would go up and they're only going to touch it twice, and they burn their mouth a couple times, and then they'll never go back and drink water ever again, their whole raising period. And so that was a huge stressor to those animals. You know, there's this excessive heat. They have no water to be able to intake. The water they did try to drink was too hot. And so just changing that little thing and going to buckets, you know, their situation significantly improved. We see that on the hygiene side all the time. So things will be clicking along just great, and then all of a sudden they have this big outbreak, and they've looked at every little thing and they can't find anything. And then we go in and start sampling their milk delivery systems or something like that, and we find one hose that hasn't been changed in several years, and it's just, you know, a area where bacteria are proliferating, and so we're giving this whopping dose of bacteria to those calves. And so yeah, or, you know, colostrum quality again. So I've had producers that, you know, the industry standard has always been a 22 bricks, but we recognize that if we can get more IgGs into these calves, that they perform better. And so I had one Jersey herd where their impetus to call was that they lost a $15,000 heifer. You know, she had proofs had come out. She was the top heifer in the nation, and then she died of scour. So they called. We improved their colostrum quality up to a 28 bricks, and things have improved significantly. And so now they're not dealing with those challenges. So again, looking for whatever that little thing is. And sometimes you have to be like a private investigator, and they need a different set of eyes just to look at what's going on. Why are these calves breaking at this time? And then we kind of look up the chain. What happened a week ago? What happened 2 weeks ago that caused these animals to now break with diarrhea?
Yeah, and what a stressful thing for a producer to have to be so like well prepared and kind of well equipped to know every stage and every step in the process. What a great opportunity for you guys to step in and not just with your expertise and your level of education, but also your experiences of what you've seen works or maybe doesn't work, or things that you've experienced in the field that you can help apply. Because as producers, we kind of do things on our farm and we get a little bit barn blind. And I think it's important to know who your resources are and how those can really help solve some pretty significant problems on farm.
So many hats too, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
you know, hay's got to be mowed, and you know, the feed wagon broke down. There's so many other things that seem more important than trying to find these little bottlenecks in the system, because those are real emergencies, right? Things have to be done on the operation, and these producers wear so many different hats. So it is like you said, you become a little barn blind. You like, you know, this worked last week, we're going to just keep doing it the way we've been doing it, and it's been working. And then when there's a disaster, it's like, oh, we've got to, you know, this pathogen came and now we've got to treat with antibiotics, when in reality it's typically something up the chain we have to look at.
Mm-hmm. And it's good then for you guys, I think, to do kind of that comprehensive review, ask the right questions, because otherwise the quick solution is also for you guys to step in, or a veterinarian to step in and say, yep, it's that pathogen or it's that bacteria, let's treat with XYZ. And so I think there are becoming more and more people in the industry that are focused kind of like you guys in how can we identify what that stressor is, get kind of farther back into the preventative mindset of what can we do along the way to prevent this from happening? Because the last thing that a producer wants is an outbreak of something or to have to input a bunch of treatment costs and whatnot. So Mike, will you talk a little bit about kind of that first step in the prevention mode? Like Travis was saying, we go all the way back to colostrum management. What are your kind of top 3 recommendations when it comes to colostrum management?
So you look at what we call failure of passive transfer, or failure of transfer passive immunity, however you want to use that technical term. So basically, though, I mean, what we're saying is calves, for whatever reason, don't get enough colostrum, or for whatever reason they didn't absorb it properly, and therein they didn't get the colostrum they needed. I mean, it's so profound what this colostrum is doing. It's quintessential thing for them. I mean, it's their immune system you're setting them up for. And you know, I like how Travis has always referred to this, but you know, it's like buying a bank account for them, right? And that immune system, you're investing in that. And there's insurance policies sometimes we have to take out in life because we know things are going to go wrong. When it comes to colostrum, number one is getting the right amount into these calves. I mean, if I had to see the biggest failure, it's typically that. And then the timing part of it, they absorb the most in the first couple hours. After you get past, even that 6 or 12-hour period, you don't get that time back. And so, we see a 30% drop in their ability to a 40 or 50% drop, from that 2-hour period down to that 12-hour period. So, the timing and the amount is probably the most, important thing. Obviously, we, like Travis said, cleanliness of the colostrum. We know if there's, and we see this on the dairy side, right? If there's bacteria in the colostrum, they've done multiple studies to show that those calves won't absorb that. And you say, well, gosh, this is all dairy stuff, right? Well, it applies on the beef cow calf side too. And getting those calves up and nursing moms, right? It's a big deal. Obviously using tools like colostrum replacers and that, I think they have their place in that. And, it's just trying to identify all of that though, so, I mean, timing, amount, that I think are the big ones.
Hey, Travis, is there anything that you want to add when it comes to starting with colostrum as kind of the first step in prevention?
Yeah, you asked for the top 3 things, right? But it's the C's of colostrum or the Q's of colostrum, right? So it needs to be of a certain quality. So typically recommending nothing less than a 24 Brix anymore. 22 just isn't quite adequate. So nothing less than a 24 Brix, and then quantity. So how much quantity should I feed? 3 to 4 liters, depending on birth weight. So if they're over 70 pounds, 4 liters. If they're under 70 pounds, 3 liters. And then quickly, it's got to get in within the first dose within the first 2 hours. And then hopefully we're following it up with a second dose 6 to 8 hours later. If we can get those 3 things right, a lot of times most of our problems will go away. Now, there's always cleanliness and things like that we have to be cognizant of, but those would be the 3 things that you have to focus on: high quality, get in fast, and then of the adequate volume.
Absolutely. No, I just think it's a great reminder, right? We've talked about all the hats that a producer wears, right? So sometimes it can be tricky to navigate all of the fine details that go into every step of the process in raising a healthy calf and preventing illness. So I just think it's an important reminder, just on day 1, within those first couple of hours, what should we really focus on? And then what's the next step and what's the next step? So thank you guys both for offering that reminder for our listeners and for your expertise on this topic today. I agree. I think it's an exciting shift, an exciting step forward for the industry, but it will come with needing a lot of resources and a lot of advice in the best way to raise our calves. So thank you both for being a part of the episode today, and join us next time on Beyond Colostrum.
Thank you for watching today's show. If you have questions about something you heard today, or maybe you have a topic you'd like us to address, leave us a message on Facebook. We'll talk again on Beyond Colostrum.